What's going on, advocates? Welcome back to another edition of the Black Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Reg. Joined today with me again. I'm giving people their flowers. Young legend in the building. Legendary because I say people don't get their flowers when they deserve them. They usually talk about all the great things they did when they were unfortunately can't hear them. So I don't introduce anybody. I like to give you the opportunity to give your credentials, the things you worked hard for, the experience, so people can know why they listening.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Naya B. I am a licensed mental health clinician and influencer, educator, speaker. I've been in private practice now for about 11 years, and I've been in the field of mental health for 21 years. I've written about 4 books. I have a podcast. I do an IG live group every Thursday in which I give free therapy. I'm an educator. I teach sociology and the behavioral health and sciences department all over pretty much. I just kind of bumped from universities to universities, so adjunct. So I do a lot of work in the mental health field, and I am a huge advocate for mental health, especially for people who look like me, who are from the areas I'm from, and who just want to get a better understanding. So what's up, everybody?
So I got a question, and it's one that's been embarking on my life since I'm starting to get in my field. I've been in probably the mental health field fairly new compared to you, fairly new. So is this who Naya wanted to be when she got older? I feel like I'm in that transition phase of like, all right, I think I found my career path. Or I'm here and I enjoy it and I love it and I could do it for free, but it's time to get paid for it. Is this what you thought when you were younger that you were going to be doing?
No, when I was younger, to be perfectly honest, my dreams weren't really big. I watched my mom, go through a lot financially. Like we were constantly living with people. We jumped from house to house, school to school. And I told myself I just wanted to be able to have an apartment, a car, and a job and not live with anybody. That was it. That was my dream. Was just not to have to live with other people. But it wasn't until I actually got to school and learned about just different dynamics of mental health, which is why I've been in the field for so long. Because once I figured it out, I went straight into it. So I learned just about different dynamics in psychology, and I was like, oh, there it is. I think before that, when I took the ACT, I scored really high in science. So I assumed I was supposed to go on and be like this biologist, this cardiologist. So initially that was like my major, but I didn't realize when it was science, it meant social science, but I started the journey in biology and I did okay, but I couldn't pass biochem. But I loved the psychology classes, the sociology courses. And I was like, this feels good. So I was like, I think this is what I want to do. And then people kept saying, there's no money in it. There's no money in it. And I'm like, but it feels good. I was like, I don't care about the money. It feels good. So that was just my journey and that was my path. And I just was committed to understanding mental health at that point. I think I was about 19 or 20.
I'm at that stage now where I was traveling along, I thought I was going to be a radio host. I thought I was going to do that. And then I went through some trauma and suicide attempts and things like that. So once I wanted to start understanding myself, why I'm feeling like this, I learned about something called mental health. And then I started going into that, speaking on my story. And then I'm like, all right, I don't want to keep reliving trauma. I'll tell my story if I have to and have conversation with people, but I want to help more people to get this awakening. And it's like, do I want to be a therapist? And mind you, this is the phase I'm at now. Like I'm in school and I'm still like, do I want to be a therapist? And everybody keeps saying I'm surrounded by therapists. They like, yo, you got to go through, you got to finish and da da da. But I'm so intrigued by conversations like this. I'm like, I'm more of a Oprah's not a therapist. Like I'm more of like, you get what I mean? I like these therapeutic conversations.
Yes.
And then for serious issues, you should go to therapy and get the treatment and things like that. But I'm still figuring out, I'm still in like a program for therapists and all of those different things, but I'm still figuring out. So it's good to hear what you said about having that moment of like, I just want to keep learning more and gobbling it up because that's the moment I'm in now feeling.
Yeah, it's a great feeling to have. Absolutely. So kudos to you on your journey. I think
All
that's
right.
going to be
Now
a dope one.
I gotta ask the question in regards of Chicago, the upbringing, and just the start of it all, like growing up in the community. Because from my perspective, I know from a hip hop perspective, knowing like some of the things that I'm from Philly, so I'll say that knowing inner city hoods and what's going on in those hoods, it's hard to be the person to navigate around it and outside of it. How were you able to navigate and grow up in the South Side of Chicago, and what have you learned growing in these environments, and what role trauma plays in them?
I will say that when people live in certain environments, they don't really realize that they're having to adapt because that's all they know. You don't really realize that you've succumbed to any of the complex trauma or any of the things that people think that's going on in the hood or what they see on TV, until you get out of it, right? So growing up in it, I would say it was normal. I would call it typical, a typical day on 94th and Racine, typical day on the South Side, and what they may look like. I got into fights all the time. That was typical every day or just about every day. Arguing, it was also some fun. Every day, like we had black block parties. We did have a great time. I think what we did learn was a sense of community. So it wasn't necessarily all bad. I think growing up in the hood in the 90s was a lot different from growing up in the hood in 2022. I think back then the neighbors, they still were allowed to discipline us, even if, they weren't our parents. Nowadays it's everybody's minding their business, but back then everybody was in our business. So I will say that the block that I grew up on, we were like a family, and although there was a lot of drama and we would get into it with each other, but then we'd be cool the next day. Our mothers would fight each other's mothers, and then we'd be cool the next day. One of the things that I learned a lot that I really, really value about growing up in the hood is just that thing called street code, that thing called loyalty, that thing called just being honest and speaking your mind, regardless of what the outcome may be. Because once I ventured out of that, I realized that I was a bit much for the world outside of the hood. And what I mean by a bit much was, I talk too much. I'm too aggressive. I'm too loud. I'm too in your face. I'm too confrontational. I didn't realize that the world was as quiet and as meek and mild and as people pleasing as it was until I left the hood. I will say growing up in my household was a bit chaotic because while we did have love, we did have a lot of drama. And like I said, fights were normal. Cussing each other out was normal. My mother's drinking was normal. My grandmother's drinking was normal. Having uncles addicted to drugs, normal. Unfortunately, there was a lot of sexual abuse and trauma that kind of went unspoken, not necessarily with me, but with other people in my family. And I was the snitch, I was telling on everybody. And I didn't realize that set me apart once I started saying, like, this isn't normal. This is weird. This is odd. This isn't how kids play. Like, it was cool until, so I realized then that it was time for me to go and do something different. But the culture of itself, my mother was a teen mom. My grandmother was a teen mom. Her mother was a teen mom, so that was typical for us. I didn't realize, like I said, that there was something not so healthy about it until I decided to go to school, until I decided to get away, until I decided that I didn't want to do this anymore. It did get to the point where the fighting was exhausting, the cursing was exhausting, the just trying to survive in an environment when you're trying to do better and people are like, oh, you think you're better than us? Oh, well, let me show you that you're not. Let me show you that you're one of us. You don't get to move and migrate and tell our business. Because, in the hood, they say what goes on in the house stays in the house. So when you walk outside that house and you start telling everybody what's going on, you're a traitor. So that initially set me apart. And I think that that's what got the ball rolling with me saying, all right, it's time for me to go. It's time for me to go. So it was beat them and join them. And I'm not joining. Sorry.
You said a lot in there. I hope I can get all the questions that's like running through my mind right now answered within the time frame that we are with each other. But one of the things, and when I was taking training, is about being a mandated reporter. And like if you see something happening, you have to say something to the officers or whatever. And while I was taking that, the first instant I thought about, and just hearing your story, I want to get your opinion on it, was I'm going to have to report some people in my family. And if this is what the qualifications of being a mandate reporter is, if abuse and all of these things going on, then I would have to report something on people that I love. And that brings up an interesting like conflict in beliefs. How would you deal with that? Because not how do you deal with that? Because being in that profession, you can't just allow or not allow, you can't see trauma. It's hard for you to see trauma and just say, all right, like I don't see it. Like, you get what I mean? Especially with people you love. How do you navigate that? There we go. That's the better word. How do you navigate the fact of trauma that people you see that's going on, but that conflicts with your profession?
Well, growing up, I think as a child, because I was a child witnessing a lot of those things. And, I think when it was happening in front of me, I called the police. I mean, that was the best that I knew to do. But as a professional and as an adult, I don't put myself in situations with my family in which I have to even be witness to any of that unless I have to, I try not to even go there. So I had to set a boundary that kept me out of that environment so that I don't have to witness anything anymore. We don't have to deal with any of that anymore. And I think with my profession, yes, being a mandated reporter is definitely one of the things that you're required to do. So unless a client or unless a child or unless it's like in my face directly happening or they're telling me that this happened, unless that's happening, I typically will not engage. Like say for instance, if someone tells me, because I know a lot of times people will say things out of anger. So as a clinician, I have to explore, where is this coming from? Is it truth? Is it anger? Is it, and if I have a client that's telling me, hey, I am being smacked every day, I'm not being fed, I'm being, touched inappropriately, definitely are going to hotline it. And report it. But if a friend is telling me, not a friend, or let's say a client is telling me that a friend told her that a cousin did blah, 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 that's not much I can do because I don't have addresses, names, numbers. I can call and say, a client told me. It's like so many secondhand, thirdhand information. So you have to decide, as well, how much do you have to share when it's time to report? Because they ask those questions: names, numbers, addresses. How did you get the information? Where did it come from? So just making sure I report accurate and true to my knowledge and to my best ability is important. And then making sure that I'm not in a position with people who are perpetrators or who are going to potentially perpetrate. I try not to be in that element when it comes to my family or my loved ones.
Nah, and I like that too, because it helped me with like some of the feelings that came up for myself when it comes to that and learning, like, that's putting things in its proper context. So I appreciate that. One of the things you said earlier about setting boundaries and not putting yourself in a position to like see things like that as a professional or as a family member. And I wanted to ask the question of I'm thinking about how, like, we know the importance of setting boundaries, correct? And but also with that, it can cause strain on relationships with individuals. And I'll give you an example for, like, even my father. We reconnected, we built a relationship, and then he started the same ish that he was doing when I was a kid. And so now I set the boundary up, but it's not like I'm not missing my dad anymore. Like, I still miss my dad. And so now it's conflicting right there. And I'm thinking about, we talk about the importance of setting boundaries, but not how they may hurt you in ways that they help you as well. Can you talk more in that perspective and talking about that from your expert opinion?
Boundaries are important because they protect you. When we're children, it's on the adults to protect our emotions and to keep us safe and things like that. But when you get older, like I said, people will hurt you, but the healing is on you. And part of that healing requires boundaries. And that it also requires grieving people who are still alive. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's a necessary one if you want to have a great quality of life. If you want to be able to have a family, raise children without those, pressures of the trauma lingering over you and all those unresolved issues. So you have to decide what's more important. Is it having a relationship with a broken person more important, or having a relationship with yourself and being able to create more healed people as a product of you, breaking generational curses? So you have to decide what's more important so that you don't feel guilty about setting those boundaries. My mother was an alcoholic, and she was very abusive emotionally. And I mean, I wouldn't say as much physically to me as she was to my sister. And I would say not physically to me because I was the kind of person that hit back, and some people would say, oh my God, you hit your mother. I'm like, well, if she tried me, yes, And so she didn't try me. But verbally, she would get, very very verbally abusive. And I love her, wanted a relationship with her that was close, that was full of like, let's go shopping, let's go, here, let's do this, let's do that. The typical things you want to do with a mom. But what I realized was that she was fighting things that were bigger than her, stronger than her, which was her alcoholism. And in order for me to realize that, I had to come to grips with the fact that I'm going to grieve that relationship. I'm not going to be able to have that in this lifetime. So what can I have with her? So what it ended up being was, her calling me sometimes for advice. What it ended up being was me being a caregiver on some level, making sure her bills were paid because I knew she was drinking, making sure that, that she wasn't homeless or things like that. That became my role. So I had to grieve the relationship I wanted, accept the relationship that I had. And that meant, sometimes putting limits on the phone calls that we have, because she would get drunk and she'd get the cursing and going on, and I couldn't handle it. So it'd be like, okay, you get 10 minutes, and that was our relationship. And I had to be okay with that. And a part of grief means acceptance. So when you get to a level of acceptance with grieving people who are still alive, you learn to function a lot better. And you realize that those boundaries are what keep you safe. It's just like getting in the car and putting on your safety belt. It's just like, I need to do this. This is important. It's not a question about whether or not I want to, it's, I need to. Because otherwise you're not going to have a great quality of life for yourself. And everybody that comes to you, you're going to be holding them accountable for scars that they didn't cause. So it's necessary.
You said a lot with it, but I wanted to make sure people heard it. And if you had anything to add to it, like grieving people while they're alive, like if you have any more to add to it, or what does that look like? How do that? Because I'm you're right, and I said that to my lady the other day, like I'm gonna have to live with the fact that I'm probably never gonna have that relationship with my father, and I'm gonna have to live with the fact that in order for me to not like hate him and go through that, I just need to separate, because you're not going to double dutch. And I'm not a kid. I don't need that type of energy. I got sons, so I don't even need that type of energy. But that grieving process still like is there of like, man, like I know you're alive. I know I can touch you, but it's not you that I want. It's the idea of you that I want, and how that still plays a part of you. Because I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, I think that the sooner people begin to look at what they have, you got to separate what you feel from what's real. And that happens even when people are no longer on this earth in the physical sense. There's that level of shock. It's like, wow, you're right here. So when you're looking at people and they're there, you have this expectation. And expectations are the root of most heartache, right? So if you're expecting this person to be in this role, like you're a dad, you're supposed to do blah, blah, blah. According to who though? Because before he was a dad, he was a man. And that man just decided that he was going to have sex. And of that came a child. People think that, because you just automatically bring a child into this world, that the dad skills and all of your demons as a man or scars as a man or problems as a man has gone away. Some people are stronger than others. And so your father may not have been that strong to put aside whatever it was that was burdening him. And so once you realize that he himself had no control over what happened, then you begin to forgive and have a little bit more compassion, and you be less angry. And you learn that I have to still live my life. How am I going to do that? How am I going to accept what is and stop looking and longing and wanting what was? And that's where missing and grieving comes in. So now you have to learn how to effectively grieve that process of, I really wanted this idea. I really wanted this. But even with having that, he's probably still going to make mistakes. He's probably still going to hurt you. You're still going to have to, figure out boundaries, because you're a grown man, and parents have a problem with letting their adult children be adult children. So either way it go, you were going to have to set a boundary. This is probably just a more extreme boundary or a different type of boundary, but it doesn't mean you can't have something. You just have to grieve the idea of what you wanted. You have to grieve the relationship that you wanted. And that's what I mean by grieving people who are still alive. They're here physically, yes, but what you want from them is not.
You dropping them gems. I can't wait for these clips to come out, because it's going. But you talked about adults I'm trying to phrase it the way you phrased it, but I'm probably gonna botch it, so I'll just phrase it my way of like when you grow into adult children. There we go. Where now you said it for yourself, like you was taking care of your mom in certain capacities and paying bills and making sure she was straight. And I think about how she felt, not she felt. Let me go to and put it towards me. How some parents they always will always put you in the position of a child, regardless of if you are more of an adult than they are per se. And I think it adds a weird dynamic to your relationship, and it's hard for adult children to navigate that. Can you talk about that experience of like just navigating like, all right, if we're going off of who's the adult here, I think I'm more of the adult here. But then you shouldn't have to fight for it because that sounds like the kid and you fighting for that. You know what I mean? So can you talk about that type of relationship?
Yeah, as adults grow older, and if they're fighting progression, there are going to be some skills that they just don't learn. And if you're battling, let's say you have an adult parent who's dealing with, or having a parent who's dealing with depression, right? Which means they're stuck in the past, which means they're going to remember you or see you at a time that maybe they felt they were their best as a parent, right? And as you grow and as you get older and as you start to have your own ideas, beliefs, especially if those ideas and beliefs are different from what they would want, they're going to try to hold on to that sense of just your childhood, because it's not just about you growing up to be an adult and they don't want that. No, they want the time where they felt the most love, where nobody left them behind, where they weren't alone or they had something to do, because the older you get, the less they have to do. Now you got friends, you got a job, you got, so they start grieving that role of being so involved. So in their minds, you're going to always be their baby, and they're going to always be in your business, and you're going to always need them, and they're going to always have an opinion, and they're going to always. And so that kind of comes with, it could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing, because parents sometimes don't know the limit. Right. And a lot of children or adult children, out of the sake of the role, they're like, well, I want to respect this person because they're my mom or they're my dad or it's my grandma. That's true. But let's talk about what happens when you become an adult. Respect is earned no matter what the role is. There has to be a level of respect. If you can say please and thank you and call before you come, so can they. And sometimes we have to require that, and we don't require it because we stay inferior in this inferior role. We sometimes have to come out of that inferior role with those boundaries that I talked about earlier. But a lot of times we are afraid to, because we don't want to seem like we're offending anybody or that we're disrespecting anybody. So we have to change, our idea of being inferior just because we're someone's offspring. Because now, especially if we're paying our own bills, if we are having our own families, if we are, taking care of ourselves in a manner that says we are independent and we're head of our own households, then we will have to start saying, hey, can you please call before you come? Or, hey, could you please not talk to my wife that way? Or, hey, can you please not talk to my kid that way? We don't want to do that because we're like in this inferior space when it comes to our parents. So that is that inner child that we're still struggling with, that maybe we need to heal and do some work with, so that we can start to protect, again, everybody around us that depends on us now.
That's a fact. I'm taking it in, and I know a couple people needed to hear that in this moment. Shifting away from it though, 20 years, 21 years, I think you said, been in the game, right? And again, I'm a baby, so I'm what is it, for think about an adult person at 21 years old versus a 5-year-old. So I'm definitely about to pick your brain on this question. Well, it's two of them. The first one is there's an awakening of mental health in the Black community where we are open into having these type of conversations, right? And me being a part of organization in Blackman Hill, I get to see a side of mental health, and then me going into school, I get to see a side of mental health. And I feel like as people are awakening, we are having, again, you've been in the field, so I'll switch it. You being a provider, knowing how overwhelmed the mental health system is, right? And now there's an awakening of people that's about to rush the mental health system that was already overcrowded. How do we help those, knowing that we can't serve everyone in the capacity that they probably need to be served, in your opinion?
I think referrals are the best thing that you can do. If it's just like with any situation, you go to a restaurant, if they're packed, what do? You got to go somewhere else. I think it's great that, people are looking forward to, treating their mental health and that they're wanting to take it seriously. But the reality is you are a human being with emotions and things yourself, and you have to take care of you. And sometimes you have to refer out. Sometimes you have to say, hey, I can't right now. Or you may have to assess every situation to see which one is, more critical when it comes to taking it. So I think there's so many free resources, and I think there's so many other outlets that you can give people ideas, which is one of the reasons why I run the free group on IG, because in the event that you are waiting for some therapy and you can't get it right now, here's some free, information that you can just click on and get that for you. So being able to be resourceful, and giving them other avenues. And sometimes people just want to be heard. They just want someone to listen to them and validate their experiences. And so then they're like, oh, thanks. That meant so much. I think there's also a generation of people who want to look like they're going to therapy. So you want to be careful with them as well, because it is so, like, at this point, everybody's going to therapy. It's like, go to therapy, go heal, you see it everywhere. And no one wants to be left out. So it makes sense for them to say, oh, I have a therapist. I go to therapy. I'm going, or I'm going to look like I'm going, I'm gonna call somebody. And they're probably not. So you definitely want to weed out who's serious from who's not, who just wants the look of going and who doesn't. Some people will get therapy and never show. So I think it's important to ask more questions, make sure you have a nice referral base for those who you can't serve. And you need to sometimes pick apart the best fits for you, just like you got to be a good fit for them. They need to be a good fit for you as well. Because my mother's an alcoholic, I don't treat alcoholics. It's just not a good fit for me. So it just depends.
No, I got you. So in that same realm, from being in the field for as many years as you have, what do you feel? And you probably just spoke on it, but I'll see if it's something different. What do you feel is missing from the conversation around mental health? Everyone's talking about it now, but what do you feel, in your expert opinion, is missing from the conversation that more people should be talking about?
Being the right clinician. I did a piece for Blavity, and I talked about how, as clinicians, we need to do better with bridging the gap between the mental health field and the right client. And what we fail to realize is that if we want people of color, or we want, Black people to come to therapy more, we need to look at, are we creating a safe space for them to heal in? Are we relatable? Are we, being racial conscious? Are we people they can trust? I think that that's what's missing. Everyone's talking about go to therapy, but no one's asking, is the therapist a good fit? Are we evaluating whether or not this is the right person for this person? And I think that that's one discussion that's not being had. The healing process works best when you trust the person across from you.
Oof. I was pulling up some of the work so people could check. Talk about some of the things you do to help with that process, so that way people could come and check out some of the things.
So typically, of course, my practice is my main base, and what encouraged me to do that was because I noticed that in the field of counseling, when I first started studying, it was based on conservative views of men, white men. All right. So they really didn't have anything for people who did not have the traditional problems I would call of divorce or grief, or anything that I tend to see in the hood, or anything that I saw on my block. I didn't see those things in my studies. I remember in class one day, I was sitting there and we had to talk about the worst day of our lives. And this student, one of my peers, she started telling a story about how her parents getting divorced was the worst day of her life. Now, this is grad school. I'm about 24 years old. And she is bawling, like she's boo-hooing, and she's just crying. She's crying. And so I'm sitting there looking at her. I got this look. I'm like literally, I'm sitting in class like. So my teacher pulls me to the side, because what it was an exercise of watching facial expressions. I failed, obviously. So she pulls me aside and she's like, I noticed that when so-and-so was telling her story, you were looking at her like, like you didn't buy it or like it was just full of crap. And I said, no, it's not that. I just feel like people got worse problems than divorce. Like there are a lot of kids out here who have never met their fathers, whose fathers are incarcerated, who, I was like, so don't nobody cry about her. Don't nobody care about her tears. And this is what I'm saying. They're like, listen,
you can't do that.
If you're going to be in this field, man, if you're going to be in this field, we're going to need you to be okay with everybody's problems, not just the ones that you know about. And at the time, I was like, really? So, I mean, it was eye-opening. So what I decided that not only did we have to learn about, other people's issues and succumb to our own stuff, there is a population of people out there who have no idea that this is even a service, that this is even a process, that this is even, so I really catered my whole practice, my whole world, to getting that type of information out there and understanding how to help, because everybody's problems are not the same. There are people who are going through trauma. There are kids who are being pulled away from their parents and they're going into state's custody. There are people who have to live with, hey, my uncle a crackhead, my mama a crackhead. How do I deal with that? How do I, those are issues of the hood. And we don't have anybody that we trust to come tell us how to work through this stuff. There's a liquor store over here. There's a church down the street, but that's it. That's it. There are no testing. There are no psychologists. There are no diagnosis. Like we don't know what that is. We heard about depression, and we tell our kids, you're not sad, go in there and take a nap, but the reality is maybe they are sad. Maybe they are scared every time your boyfriend come over because you touch him when you go to sleep. Like, so who's going to help with that? So I dedicated my career and my practice to learning about all the issues, not just divorce, not just, grief, but I specialize in anger management, sexual abuse and trauma, eating disorders. I specialize in co-occurring disorders that are personality focused. I treat schizophrenics. I even work with perpetrators of sexual abuse, not just the victims. So I learned that I have to make myself well-rounded. So I started writing my books because I thought that it was important for people to see me as a person, a human being. A lot of people don't trust clinicians because they're very robotic, textbook, or they're afraid that this person's going to hotline me. They're going to judge me. So I'm like, hey, I need people to know I'm a real person. I have done real things and I have gone through real things and I've gotten through real things. So that was the purpose of me writing my books. I started to be more transparent about the fact that I like to laugh. So I started my TikToking and I started just being open and honest about this is me. Like I'm a mental health clinician, but I'm also a woman. I'm a funny woman. I'm a mom. I like to have a good time. I've been married. I've been divorced. Those are the people that clinicians trust. And those are the type of clinicians that people need so that they can actually heal.
Yeah, no, and that's honestly one of the reasons why I did decide to get in the space too, as a man, because I was like, it's a woman dominated field, and then there's more men that need it too, and need an example. Even if I don't be the clinician, I can be like, hey, you can trust Naya. Naya know what you're talking about, and just being able to refer, like you said, or pass off and say to get the healing in our community. Because if it's a person that don't look like them, white male, white woman, is gonna be like, man, that's that white people stuff. That like we don't need that, or we need a version of that, but we don't need that. And they're right to an extent. As I'm in the school process of getting all of the credentials and learning everything, I'm learning how I get the wonderful opportunity to practice theory at the same time. I get to do it at the same time. So as I'm reading the theories, I'm like, y'all are like how you said with the girl, like y'all missing something within this textbook that's not my reality. And I say that in papers and all of those different things and have these type of conversations because it's missing from the field. So salute to you for even offering all that you do in different capacities that you do it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think it's well needed. So I want it to be all inclusive for everybody, not just middle class folks, wealth class. I want it to be for poverty. I want it to be Black, white, brown. It doesn't matter. I want to make sure I can meet the needs, or my practice can meet the needs of everybody.
All right. So you said something. I was going to go a different direction, but you brought it up when you said you treat everyone, correct?
Mm-hmm.
How is it working with perpetrators that do in sexual abuse and as a clinician, like knowing that like you morally don't agree with what they did?
It's not about whether or not I morally agree with anything, actually, because when you're in this field, who you are morally or not supposed to go out the window. Um, but what I
But I
will
liken it
say,
to like what you said about alcoholism, where you like, yo, my
that
mom, I
wasn't
didn't
about
want to do it.
morals. That was about triggers. You know, that was about
21 years in the game.
right. That was trying to decrease counter transference. That's what that was about, protecting the client by knowing I can't, it hits too close to home.
Mm.
Now perpetrators, once you realize that they were victims who were never treated, you work with them a little differently. You know, most of the time perpetrators were perped. That's how they were made. No one said anything. It just went on. And at some point that behavior became a learned behavior and it became how they coped. And most of the time they will perp on people who resemble the age that they were when they were perped on.
Mm.
So once you start to get behind the psyche and you start to pull back those layers, I have to do some healing with them and some treatment at the same time so that they can recognize that, you know, there's no need for this behavior anymore, because now you get to tell someone your story. Now you get to help someone, you know, and help yourself at the same time. So I have compassion for them because these are the ones that nobody paid attention to. They just shunned them. And really no one paid attention until they started perping on other people. Now it's, oh, you need help. Now you're sick. Now you're this. It's like, but when they came to you and said, hey, uncle touched me, or your female friend has been molesting me every time you leave, you know, we don't believe you. You just don't want me to be happy. Go sit down. You know, so I mean, I could go all day about just the pain that a lot of perpetrators are in.
Mm.
And it's not so much as that I agree with what they're doing. I think that they need help just like victims do.
Mm. Nah, and thank you for sharing that too, because I think it changes a lot of people's not mindset, but understanding that they need healing as well. Like we can't just throw them away as people. That's not how the way the world works. But I did have a question about eating disorder, and you going through the field and learning it. Because when I think of eating disorder, I think of the white girl who wants to stay skinny, so she throws up the food every time she eat. But as I'm learning and getting credentialed and learning these different things, we have eating disorders in the Black community as well. Can you talk
Absolutely.
about that from your perspective and your expertise?
Well, I think that I think Black people binge, purge, restrict. They do all of that. And I think the other thing is they overeat. Obesity is an eating disorder. Overeating or eating when you're sad, or making sure that you eat for comfort food, or it's definitely an eating disorder. And there are a lot of people in the Black community who do restrict food and who do binge and purge. Some of them just binge, you know, and they may not purge, but restricting is also a thing. And I think that's one of the biggest myths, is that it's the white person's thing. It's really not. Eating disorder is a disorder about control and loss and lack thereof. And once you understand that, like body image, you know, body image falls into the category of body dysmorphia and all these other things that are in the category of eating disorders. And people don't realize that. You know, when you're constantly cutting at your body, or constantly changing your body, or pinching at your body, trying to change, you know, that falls into that category. It happens a lot. And basically what it revolves around, and it depends on who it is, but I always explore the function of anybody's addiction, whether it's an addiction to food, or whether you're restricting food, or whether you have anger, frustration. It all serves a function, because otherwise you wouldn't need it. You wouldn't need to do it if it wasn't trying to cover up something that was more painful and unbearable.
Mm.
So
Again, I'm gonna just keep saying 21 in the game, man.
Thank you.
Talk about the IG live, the therapy. You said you give the free ones every week. Let them know what they can expect from it.
Every Thursday, 6 p.m. So I do groups.
What time zone?
Central Standard Time.
Okay.
Central Standard Time, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. We have different topics. I have had so many topics. It started as a result of the pandemic because people were at home and they weren't able to really do anything. And I knew they were stressing out and being very anxious about being restricted. People don't like being told what to do, right? So they were at home and they were just stressed. And so I started doing groups about anxiety and how to treat it and how to deal with it. Then I talked about depression, and then it just became a thing. So now we've talked about relationships, parenting, insecurities. The last one we did was, which was last night, how to be a good listener. Because people aren't really listening in their relationships effectively. And so people come on in a group. It's just like group therapy. They share. They're very respectful of one another. A lot of people in these groups have built relationships with each other, and they hang out, and they really do talk about the things that they struggle with. And they come into the group and they talk more about some of the things that they struggle with, depending upon the topic. So sometimes people will inbox me and say, hey, can we talk about this next group session? Or can we, talk about that? So I have had so many different topics, and I try to dig deep, like we've talked about narcissism. We've talked about just control issues, liars, manipulators, relationship stuff, anything you can think of.
Attack.
We've been on it. We've been on it. So yes, it's a pretty dope group. I love it. I love it. So 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Thursdays. And yeah, just come join us and hang out.
So pulling from some of the highlights from last night, how does one become a good listener, or what does it take to be? Actually, I don't even want to ask that. What were some of the highlights of good listening from last night?
Well, a lot of people didn't realize that when you listen, you have to remove yourself from the equation.
Mm.
And of course, everybody knows that in order to listen, you have to close your mouth, and you have to open your ears and your mind at the same time. Recognize that you in the moment know nothing at all. You are not the expert on this topic, and you have no say in how the other person reveals, says, or communicates anything that they do or say. Your job is to receive it, interpret it. And there's a difference between being heard and listening. Like hearing is the actual idea, the actual sound hitting your eardrum. Okay. Listening means your brain is computing it, you are understanding it, and you're trying to carry out what you heard. So just even those basic skills, or being able to recognize that paraverbals and how your tone, it stops a person from hearing you or listening to you. So if you come into a situation and you're aggressive, or if you're like, using your hands, or if you're loud, you've now created a barrier to the listening. So it's kind of like a
Guilty.
twofold. It was, like, how do you want to be, how do you want to get your point across? What's the message? What's the point? And I think another piece that people were really, really fond of and excited about was just the idea that you have to recognize that feelings are one word and beliefs are many. People will say, I feel, followed by a whole series of words. That's not a feeling, that's a belief or a thought. So when you say, I feel sad because I think you don't like me, that changes the tone, and it makes the person open to hearing you or listening more, because you started out not attacking them, but owning the emotion to say, I feel sad because I think you don't like me. So now you're not accusing them. They're able to step outside of themselves and hear you and hear your perspective, and they can respond to it a lot better. So there was a couple of things that we got into, but those were some of the highlights.
No, I love it, and you just taught me a few things within that too, because you don't realize how many things I play. I had to learn the little passion thing. I speak with passion, and I'm like, no, I'm just talking with conviction. Like I'm not yelling, I'm not mad. Like I can calm down right now. But learning how to that gives off a certain type of energy when you're doing that, and it's good. And I think I forgot who I heard it from, where they say it's a good speaking voice when you're speaking to 1,000, but when you're speaking to one person, that can feel like a horror room. Like, and that when they brought that into that perspective, I understood it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was gonna ask something else, but let me check over my little notes. Yeah, we went over that. Anything you want to give to the people before we end, like and just leave and embark on the people as far as like wellness and in the community in general.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people keep saying, mental health is real, and we'll say that we're advocates for mental health, but then we'll judge people for displaying the symptoms of mental health. or mental illness. And I think that we have to stop being hypocrites in that way. You know, we can't say that, oh, mental health is real, people need to get help. And then when they exhibit these signs and symptoms that say, hey, I need help, we judge them. And, oh, you're crazy. Something's wrong with you. Well, that's what a mental illness is. A mental illness means that there's something going on, you know, in the psyche. I would like to just ask people to just be a little bit more compassionate, ask more questions, be less judgy, you know, try not to judge people for their circumstances or conditions, but just ask, you know, what do you need right now? How can I be more of service to you during this time with what you're going through? Because it's got to be tough. Everybody's going through something and everybody deals with it a little differently. And we don't know their makeup. We don't know what it is that got them to this point. So we just need to do better at, you know, if we're going to be advocates for mental health, then we need to really be advocates for mental health and not just say it because it sounds good or because it's cliche, but actually be in the midst of saying, hey, how can I help you? Because right now it really does seem like you need, you know, some assistance. And I think that will go a long way, and it will make people more comfortable with just getting the help because they're less judged. So that's pretty much what I got for the people listening. So yeah, that's about it. Have more compassion. Let's be more compassionate to one another.
Please share the Naya's message. Share this episode with somebody. Make sure they get in tune with everything that she has going on, especially with the free therapy on Thursdays. Share this episode. Share a clip, just so that way people can have more healing and compassion in our community. Because I believe 100% what you said about how people judge, but also it's like, but we're healing. It's like no, it's conflicting beliefs at this point. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, tell everybody what Naya says. Drop a quote on the review that she said in the comments or whatever the case may be. And I remember that this platform has never been about being a replacement to therapy. It's an alternative place where people share therapeutic stories. Thank you for listening.